I want to thank you all for coming here today and welcome you to the 18th annual West Michigan Economic and Commercial Real Estate Forecast Breakfast. My name is John Potvin. I'm the Managing Director of Colliers International, and on behalf of our entire Colliers team, we're pleased to have you here today. Last year, I publicly thanked Natalie Burns and our marketing team for helping put together such a great event. As you know, Natalie is a huge part of this event every single year that she's been with Colliers. Just so you're aware, Natalie's gone today. She's on maternity leave, and she left us here in the middle of an RV show. So thank you for bearing with us and getting those extra steps in today. But really want to thank Natalie has been working on this tirelessly behind the scenes. We have a great team that's really stepped up this year to help a lot. I know I'll probably forget some people, but Jamie, Sarah from our Holland office, Abby and Callie, and then Jeff and Glenn, and so many others have played an integral role in putting this together today. So I want to thank all of the people from our office at Colliers. Over the last year, we've had the opportunity to work with some amazing local businesses and entrepreneurs, and we've also helped bring regional and national players to the area. In addition, we formally acquired our office in Holland, which is a great team that dominates real estate on the lakeshore, as well as expanded with more people selling in Lansing, as well as hiring a new managing director for our property management team, Kyle Sisko. So we're extremely excited about the growth we've experienced in the past year. As West Michigan continues to appear on the radar of investors and companies across the Midwest and around the United States, we're looking forward to new opportunities in 2018. Again, this year, our event is presented by Colliers International of West Michigan and Seidman College of Business at Grand Valley State University. On behalf of Colliers, I want to thank Seidman College and Grand Valley for their active support and participation in this important event. As in the past, our event this year is made possible by many companies who have generously given to put on such an event like this. We want to extend our thanks to our ongoing lead sponsor, Fifth Third Bank. And we'd also like to thank our new partner sponsor, Property Tax Consultants. Can we please take a moment to recognize all of our sponsors? We greatly appreciate you being here this morning and taking time out of your day to attend this event. Please use the hashtag forecast2018 throughout the event for all social media posts. You will walk away from our real estate event today with new insights, trends, and data, and we will make sure to get you out on time. Now I'd like to welcome Peter Drasma from Fifth Third Bank to say a few words. Please welcome Peter to the stage.
Thank you, John, and good morning, and thank you for attending the CRE forecast today. As John mentioned, my name is Peter Drasma. I'm a director of Fifth Third's Commercial Real Estate Group here in West Michigan. We're very delighted that you're here, and we're also very happy to be the lead sponsor in this year's event. Fifth Third's been the title sponsor for several years now. The reason we support this is the participation commitment of the local community commercial real estate market. We also support commercial real estate by committing nearly $750 million to Michigan real estate developers and development projects. In addition, we are also committed to community involvement through donation of our time, talents, and treasures through the corporate and individual level, as shown on the handout on the tables. All these efforts, I think, improves the lives and makes West Michigan a great place to live and work. Thank you for being here today, and we're looking forward to a great 2018. And now please enjoy a video from another key sponsor.
Good morning, I'm Jack Aylesworth, partner at Property Tax Consultants, proud to be a sponsor of the Colliers Economic Forecast for 2018. Property taxes are a big burden, and one confusing issue is the uncapping of the taxable value due to a sale or transfer of ownership. The year following the purchase of a new property, the taxable value becomes uncapped, which increases the annual tax bill, sometimes dramatically. In Michigan, assessors are responsible for valuing each property every year. This is called the SEV, or State Equalized Value, and represents 50% of the property's market value. The SEV will increase and decrease based on market performance, without limitation. Taxable values, however, are capped for the life of ownership and can only increase by the Consumer Price Index, or 5%, whichever is less each year. Taxable values are tied directly to your annual tax burden and will uncap and recap the year following a sale, increasing the new owner's tax burden. For example, a property with an SEV of $500,000 has a market value at $1 million. If the property has been owned for multiple years, the taxable value, being capped, would be less at $400,000. This would result in a property tax bill of $20,000 per year. A sale or transfer of ownership causes an uncapping of the taxable value the following year. The old taxable value at $400,000 is uncapped and automatically resets to the SEV of $500,000. The new tax burden is increased by 25% to $25,000 per year. This is a big risk for a new property owner. Our firm, Property Tax Consultants, minimizes these risks for our clients by navigating the tax appeal process and partnering with assessors to determine accurate and fair market values. 2018 is looking to be another exciting year for West Michigan yet again. Your assessment change notices come out in January and February, and we're always around to assist when needed. Visit skylinepropertytax.com/Colliers to download our free ebook and learn more.
Good morning, everyone. I'm not going to talk about taxes. Excuse me. I'm Diana Lawson, and I am the Dean of the Seidman College of Business, and I am very happy to welcome all of you to the annual West Michigan Economic and Real Estate Forecast. We have partnered with Colliers for many, many years, and this has grown to be a very, very important partnership and strong partnership for many people, as we can see by the size of this room and the number of people who are here. So I want to tell you a little bit about what we're doing to help with the economic growth of the area. Of course, as an academic institution and a business college, our area is talent. We help to build talent for West Michigan. And in the Seidman College of Business, about 60% of our graduates stay in West Michigan. So I'm guessing we have a number of graduates from Seidman out in the audience. And a number of our students, whether they come from the east side of the state, the northern part of the state, they choose to stay in West Michigan because of how vibrant it is and because there are so many things to do for young people starting careers. I brought up things to look at. They're on your table. So we have the Seidman Business Review, which we distribute every year at this event. And there are some very interesting articles in here. I want to bring your attention to one on women and women on boards and women in executive positions. The biggest, as we talk to companies, and we have a lot of companies who are represented on our advisory boards at Seidman, when we talk to companies, either our advisors or others, the number one issue they have is talent. How are we going to find and maintain the talent we need in order to continue this economic growth that we've been experiencing here in West Michigan? And so we look at that as our responsibility as a university. And we have programs, as many of you know, undergraduate programs that are very, very strong. But I want to bring your attention to a number of the graduate programs. Because the talent is not for companies, it's not just hiring new people. It's making sure the people they have the skills and the leadership development they need to create the pipeline for succession planning and continued sustainability of the strong economic growth of the area. So we've really developed really strong programs. EMBAs, an executive MBA, an MBA, and we are in the process of developing a non-degree program that we call MicroMasters that is very specific in its area. So why is this different or special? It's because we've developed these programs with the help of you. We have very strong partnerships with companies, and we believe that this partnerships makes our programs unique and will help the area to grow. So please take a look at this if you're interested in a graduate program, or take it back to your company, to your HR people, to your executives. Because as you will find if you haven't already experienced it, talent is going to be a struggle now over the next 10 years, because I'm guessing, like me, there's a number of people who might want to retire sometime within the next 10 years. So I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Paul Isley. Now, I think most of you, if you've been here before, you already know Paul. But if you haven't been here, Dr. Isley has a PhD in economics from the University of Wisconsin and has been on the faculty at Seidman for, I think, 2018, somewhere around there, 18 to 20 years. He doesn't look that old, but he's been here for a while. And he's been doing this economic forecast presentation for 5 or 6 years. So he is very well respected, very well known in the region. He does a lot of other economic studies for specific groups. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Paul Isley.
Okay. So as we start to look at this year, and we're looking down the road for 2018, I want to ask a few questions. Anybody have a good year this year? Anybody happy? No? You're not happy with this last year? Oh, then you're not going to like next year. We had low unemployment. We had increasing wages. We had good profits. We had low interest rates. If you're not going to make money in a business world like that, you probably should be rethinking your path. All right? So, where have I been over the last year? So, as we look at the last 5 years, as I've helped you with your journey, we've given you predictions about what the coming year is going to be. What this graph shows you is my forecast range. I give a forecast range for things like employment growth. In the last few years, last year that range was between 2.2 and 2.6%. The red dot is where it actually ended up. So you can see over the last 5 years, there's only 1 year where I've been off, and that was 2013, and I have some saving grace in that every single forecaster was off that year. So I was at least in good company. This year, as we look at what was happening in December, because this last 2017 doesn't have the full year, it's likely that I'm going to come in range again in this last year. So I hope that that accuracy has helped you as you have made your business decisions over the last few years and helped guide your path. So what's my message for today? My message for today is the smooth roads you'll enjoy in 2018 will become bumpy, leading to new opportunities for you. You need to be paying attention to those bumps because those bumps actually are where you'll make your money. So, you're here today as an investor, a developer, a real estate person, a lender, and you need good information in order to make those decisions as you move forward through the year. I'm going to help you with that by answering 3 questions. All right? And the first of those questions was, what are the indicators that show a smooth 2018? The first of these indicators is choice, is confidence. We have really strong confidence across West Michigan, and in fact, I'm seeing that at the end of the year, that even started to accelerate. So what I'm hearing in early January is even much more confident than what I was even hearing in late December. This confidence number comes from us surveying 1,200 businesses across West Michigan. And we get about a 20-25% response rate depending on the year. This year we were close to 20%. And what they're telling us right now is they're just as confident now as they were way back in the 1990s. So we need somebody to come up with a new song like Party Like It's 1999, right? Because it's pretty good right now, and businesses are being very successful. The second indicator is employment growth. This is a place where West Michigan has really shown. We have been growing since the Great Recession much faster than the rest of the United States or the west of Michigan. This is actually leading us to draw people into the area. We're not losing to other states anymore. We're starting to see people move back from the south. We're starting to see that we continue to draw in and on the order of 3,000 people from the rest of the state every year. And we continue to see that we are a place for people from other countries to come. These are all very good drivers, and we see very strong employment growth. The bad news is you can see that starting to trail off there at the end. So you can see we were up and we're starting to come down. So what's going on there? Well, when we ask all of you what's going on there, you tell us that it's slowing down. In fact, our projections for employment growth this year, those gray bars, show that there's a lot more people seeing the 1% to 2% range now than last year. Most of that has to do for a very good reason. We are out of workers. You can't hire them if they don't exist. All right? So this is an important component. We see employment growth changing, and this year we expect the employment growth to be about half of what we saw last year. But that doesn't mean bad news for business. What that means is you're going to have to produce more stuff with fewer people. And what we see as we look at these indicators, the sales growth indicators, the orange line is West Michigan. This is our PMI index done by Brian Long out of Grand Valley State University. And the blue lines are the national PMI index. And what you can see is that in 2014, 2015, our manufacturing sector was performing much stronger than what we were seeing nationwide. And that was on the backs of automotive. All right. Then, as we came into 2016, 2017, that automotive growth peaked. And you can see that we've come back from that little doldrum back in 16. That was mostly people getting worried about the election. So we saw orders go on hold. We saw people delay purchases. We saw businesses delay investment because they didn't know who was going to be president. Then what we discovered is as soon as we knew who was president, they said, well, we can like or dislike him, but we know what he's going to do. So now we can make business decisions, and people moved ahead. As we've come out a little slower than the rest of the country. But that's mostly because we have that drag now where automotive's not growing. The good news is it's not going away. And when we ask all of you, how is it going? The expectation for this coming year is substantially higher sales growth than what we saw last year. All right? It's a lot higher. And you can see that with our gray line there, having shifted all the way to the right. In fact, last year we were looking at sales growth around 2%. Now we're looking at sales growth between 3 and 3.5%. That's a big change. And we're doing that on slower employment growth. So, the second question, what are the signs that smooth road is coming to an end? Because we're going to get there. We all know it. We all want to know when it is. And you'll all like to know that economists might know. We're only about 1% better than all of you at guessing. But we want to look at this a little bit and give you the few signs that we're seeing now as to where we're heading. The first of those signs is where we are compared to potential GDP. So that blue line down there, that's actual GDP. And you can see the Great Recession where we go down, and then you can see us trend back up. That orange line is our potential GDP. That's the amount of output that we could have before you start having problems finding workers, start having to raise wages, start having problems finding suppliers, lead times stretch out, and it becomes hard to do business again. All right? The important markers here are where we cross potential GDP. When we cross potential GDP over the last 50 years, so there's been only one time where we've crossed it where we haven't had a recession between 18 and 24 months later. All right? Only one time. And that time we sat on the orange line for a long time. So we crossed it, but we didn't really cross it. We sort of sat on it. So the bad news is we crossed potential GDP in the third quarter. Now we want to know whether we're sitting on it or not, so it's still a little bit in question. But most of you know that the fourth quarter was pretty nice. We had a lot of retail sales, we had strong orders, we had strong production. So I have the feeling that you're going to see that blue line just shoot past that orange line at the end of the month when we get our new GDP numbers. So that's our first sign. So what leads us back? Those constraints lead us back. Higher wages or higher input prices, those types of things. So our second sign is wage growth. So this is wage growth across the United States. And what you can see is that we have that average inflation plus productivity line. As long as wage growth is below that, we can do that forever. Because you're building more and more stuff, and less of the value of that is going to workers. So you can do that for a really long time. Once we cross that line, you can't hold that up very much longer. Now you're paying people more money to make less stuff. That doesn't work for very long. What we can see right now is we're well below that line. You can see it coming up a little bit. But this hides some hotness in the overall economy. What we see right now, if you start looking at things decomposing it, is that we have retiring workers who are old and there's a lot of them because they're baby boomers. So they're retiring, paid a lot, and they're being replaced by millennials. There's a lot of them, and they get paid less. So that's dragging down that overall wage growth. If instead of looking at the average, we look at the wage growth across everybody, it's above 5%. And for the fastest growing occupations, the 25% on the top, they're making almost 14% a year more than they did last year. That's real wage growth, and that's a real constraint. All right? So, a weak sign that we're getting crossing, but we're seeing signs in many industries where we have crossed. And this is because our available labor pool is gone. You can see that labor pool shot up during the Great Recession. We had lots of available workers, and then it came crashing down because we started to really take those workers and deploy them. Again, look, our pool of available workers is about the same now as it was back in the late 1990s, early 2000. This takes into account people who want to work or are underemployed, and it takes into account reasons why they might not be able to work. So what we do see is right now in West Michigan, we have a higher proportion of our workers who are applying for jobs failing drug tests. So as I talk to HR firms, as I talk to hiring people across West Michigan, we're hearing numbers around 40%. Nationwide, when they ask people, they hear about 20-25%. So we're hearing a higher percentage. Part of that has to do with the fact that we've hired so many people here, we're down to that last group. So as I hear businesses trying to expand this year, I hear them trying innovative programs for convicted felons and choosing not to drug test to try and expand their labor force. So we're really hitting the bottom where our labor force is. And this is going to be key to why we're going to see accelerating wage growth over the course of the next year. And we saw the end of it at the end of this last year. How many of you either paid out or were in a company that paid out a good bonus this year? Anybody? Yeah. The bankers told us that they were drawing out a lot of money at the end of the year to put into year-end bonuses. So that will show up in our compensation numbers when we look at the fourth quarter. The third sign is rising commodity prices. So here you can see that blue line. It takes this dive around 2016 and comes back. So if you've been coming here many years, you'll know just before that dive, I was standing here on stage and I was asked, what's the surprise that's going to happen this year? And I said, by the end of the year, you're going to pay less than $3 for gasoline. Half of you laughed at me. But by the end of the year, we were below $3. We were actually below $2.50. That really dragged back all commodity prices. At the same time, China and Europe started to have problems. So they weren't competing for the commodities that we need. What's problematic for us this year? Well, you've already seen oil prices start to go back up. You're probably seeing longer lead times as you're buying your input goods. And China and Europe, they're actually firing pretty well right now. They're on the front part of their business cycle. We're on the back part of ours. So that means we're going to have more competition for all these things, and it's going to lead to higher commodity prices. You should be looking for these things. If they don't appear because different things happen, it will stretch out when the next recession comes. All right. My last sign for you is a flattening yield curve. So for those of you who don't know, a yield curve looks at the difference between those short-term interest rates and those long-term interest rates. And the reason it matters is those bankers out there, to make money, need a differential because they borrow money on the short and lend it to you on the long, and they need that gap. Well, it's one of the ways they make money. All right? So as we look at this, that yield curve has been coming down. In fact, over the last year, the one-year rate has gone up 0.75 percentage points, or for you finance people out there, 75 basis points. That 10-year rate is at the same rate now as it was at the beginning of the year, last year. That's flattening. And right now, we're looking at the Federal Reserve doing between 0.75 and 1.25 in short-term interest rate increases. And in fact, because of the heat we see this year, the risk is more on the upside than on the downside on those interest rate increases. That's pushing up the short run. What about the long run? The long run has a problem. It has a little bit of an anchor because it's set on expectations. So how many of you out there are millennials? Anybody? You just don't like to raise hands. You're like my students. Anybody out there a millennial? How about a late baby boomer born after 1970? Generation X, born after 1970. Okay, that's more than 50% of the room. None of you in your adult life have seen interest rates really high. I remember having a CD at 14%. None of you should, unless you had one when you were a really young child. As a result, your expectations of inflation are different than the older generation, and it's lower. And that's helping anchor that long-term interest rate at a lower rate than we would expect. Why might that not happen? Well, we have some rumblings out there that the rest of the world's doing well and that they're going to stop buying U.S. bonds. I've heard that many, many times. It's never been true, so we'll see. My last question that I'm going to answer, the third one. What are the important mile markers to watch these year? So these are the things that could stretch out that next recession, make it happen later, or move it forward for you. So I don't know what's going to happen with these over the course of the year, but I want you watching them because it will give you an edge on that. So the first one is tax law changes. Anybody hear about this tax law change? It's just a small thing. In fact, we're still digesting all the changes that might happen from it, and we're still having firms react to what's happening. But what we can see is that after we combine together the corporate and personal tax changes, this is the change in the budget deficit for the United States based on the Joint Commission on Taxation. And you say, hey, wait a minute, what about this, what about that? This shows that we have about $1 trillion in additional debt. If there were no change in growth, it would be about $1.5 trillion. If I take the most liberal think tank, they say 1.5 trillion. If I take the most conservative think tank, they say 0.5 trillion. So saying around 1 trillion is right in the center of that range. So you should be thinking about this. Look at where the stimulus is. Deficit spending by the government is stimulus. It makes the economy run hotter. That's happening in the early years. Interestingly enough, right around something we call a presidential election. I have no idea why they might have chosen that year, but it makes sense. That means things in those first couple of years, the growth rate will be about a percentage point higher than they would have been without that stimulus. That effect goes away as we get into 2021, 22, as companies adjust to this tax change. So this is a big deal, and we should be worried about this. It's going to heat the economy up, and it's going to put greater pressure on prices than we would have had without it. The other bad news for us is as we watch how companies are behaving with their tax stimulus dollars, they're behaving by doing two things so far: announcing stock buybacks, and number two, increasing wages for their workers. Good for their workers. What I'm not hearing yet is we're investing in new capacity. If I don't hear that, that blue line that we talked about before is going to be going up and crossing that orange line much faster, meaning GDP will cross potential GDP much more firmly because of this. What about the distributional effect? How big is this tax law change? If we combine together, again, that personal tax change and the corporate tax change, this is the distributional effect. You can argue a little bit, but generally speaking, this is about what's expected. That low-income group, below 30,000, there's not much change. You see a little negative, a little positive. It's not a big change. People who don't pay a lot of taxes aren't affected a lot by tax changes. The middle income, that 50 to 75,000, that group that we really see here in Michigan a lot of, they get about $500 to $700 extra a year. So do you think they're going to go buy a new car because of this? Probably not. They might go out to eat an extra time or two. If we look at the more wealthy, 100 to 200,000, if you call that wealthy, upper middle class, we're looking at about $1,500, maybe a little bit more. And for somebody earning $150,000 a year, that's not going to change their consumption pattern much either. So these are on the margin small changes. They're going to affect small purchases, and they don't outweigh the biggest change that we're going to have over the next year, which is, we'll see here with this next mile marker, housing prices. So over the last few years, we can see that our housing prices have accelerated faster than the United States. So Kent County, right now compared to 2005, if we spent $100 on a house in 2005, we would need to spend almost $130 today. In other words, a $300,000 house is nearly a $400,000 house. In Grand Rapids, we are at about $115 now compared to $100 in 2005. Both of those are well above that U.S. line that you see there with the gray. We've crossed them, and we're accelerating compared to the rest of the United States. Where's the scary story in here? Well, remember those two things that I showed you, the good times are coming towards an end. So we talked about interest rates going up. What does that do to mortgage rates, at least eventually? Probably brings them up. At the same time, somebody buying a $200,000 house likely won't be itemizing, so likely won't get the advantage of the house price deductions under the new law. The combination of those two things right now, we're forecasting will add approximately $350 a month to the price of a $200,000 house. That's 20 to 30%, depending on where your interest rates are. What do you think is going to happen to people's willingness to buy houses? It's going to go down. Good news for us, really good news for us. We got those millennials again. See, we could blame them for interest rates not going up like we expect. Now they're our savior. They all want houses. So, and they're getting raises. So hopefully those things will lead to them making up the difference. We also have a large residential housing shortage right now. But what this means is likely they'll stay in their rental property for a year or two, which is probably a good news for many of you who have stakes in some of these cranes running around downtown right now. The next mile marker is exports. Right now, people are projecting exports are finally turning around and going back up. The US dollar has weakened. We expect it to weaken further this year. And the combination of those things will be good news, except for we're extremely worried about NAFTA. So you might have an Uncle Joe who lost his job way back in 1995 because some company moved some production from the United States to Mexico. Chances are Uncle Joe found a new job, is working in another company, still crabs about that 1995 job loss, but doesn't realize that his job today is dependent on NAFTA. So if you're in manufacturing in West Michigan, we depend on that supply chain. It keeps our prices the lowest in the world for producing the types of goods we're producing. And without it, things will realign and we will lose ground. Understand, this is not a small effect in West Michigan. We have $5 billion worth of exports from West Michigan each year. $5 billion with a B, dollars. That's not small change, and it's highly dependent on NAFTA. So I'll be watching for that. Any major change in NAFTA, bad news for automotive, bad news for ag, and those are two of our strongest industries. Inflation. So last year I thought inflation would come back a little heavier this year than it has. It's been a little bit restrained. Part of that was the weakness in the rest of the world. Part of that was the drop in commodities prices. But you can see it's coming back now too. And in fact, at the end of the year, we started to see greater strength on this line. So you should be watching that inflation number. If we start seeing inflation numbers around 2.5%, you'll know the end is near. All right? 2%, not worried yet. And one of the reasons why prices are remaining restrained here in the United States right now is the changes that we've seen in oil. All right? The blue line here is the price of oil in West Texas Intermediate, the change in it, the 12-month% change, smoothed out. And what we can see is the gray line is the rig count. If you go back 20 years ago, when the price changed, you had to then hire a ship, drive out into the middle of Gulf of Mexico, drill a hole. If there was nothing there, move up, drill another hole, and a year to 5 years later, you found oil. Nowadays, we have something called fracking. The price goes up, you go in the backyard, stick down a tube, pump in some sludge, and you get oil. They can turn it around in weeks, not years. And so you can see that already the production started to change, and we've had 3 upward revisions of the oil production numbers for the United States in just the last 3 months. So we expect that it's accelerating up, and part of this is once we get above $50 a barrel, half of our fields are economical. The other half become economical somewhere near $60 a barrel. So we're well in that sweet range right now. And the greatest constraint for them is going to be finding workers, because if they can't find the workers, they can't drill more wells. So we've walked through 3 major components for you. We've given you, first of all, why things look great for 2018. We expect faster sales growth, slower employment growth than we saw last year. The United States employment growth will remain steady. We've talked about what might bring us to an end, and we see the yield curve, commodity prices, wages, all starting to show that we've crossed the potential GDP and will lead to a pullback sometime in 19 or 20. All right? The tax change might have pushed us out towards 20. The last few years I've been telling you 19. 19 is what the models are still saying, but as we start to build in some of what's happening with the tax law change, it might push us into 2020. All right? So, what should you do about all that? What I want you to walk away with is, number one, you need to get ready for tougher borrowing conditions by the end of the year. You're going to have higher interest rates. Banks are going to have a tougher time making money on the lending that's going on, and you're going to have tighter borrowing conditions. Now, do we need them? We have an extra $2 trillion on hand at businesses. We might not need them the same as we used to. But it's going to be tougher borrowing conditions. You should be prepared for accelerating compensation this year. Last year we were able to draw some kids out of the basement. They stopped playing World of Warcraft and came to work. That was good. But they're done now. We're not finding them. So now we're going into convicted felons and people who can't pass their drug exam. Those might not be bad things. This could be good things for us to do, and we can find very productive workers in both of those groups. But it means that we're really at end game of finding new sources of labor. So we're going to have to accelerate our compensation. The other problem is, here in the Midwest, our wages have not kept pace. So in 2005, we've all had about the same compensation, average compensation across the United States. Between then and now, theirs went up faster than ours. And in the rest of the United States, they're now about 10% higher than we are. So if you're looking for workers where you have to compete outside of West Michigan, your wages are too low, and you're probably complaining that you cannot find workers. We're looking at smaller, less qualified worker pools. Just talked about that. How do you take care of that? You need to plan to take advantage of that short, shallow recession we're looking at sometime in 19, maybe as late as 20 now. Why? Because if you go back to 1980s, recessions used to look like this. Everybody lost their job. Everybody got their job back at the end. And then you went several years, and then everybody lost their job. Everybody got it back. What do we see now? Everybody loses their job, and then not everybody gets them back. And it comes back slowly. And that effect started with the 1990s recessions and has accentuated as we've moved on. What does that mean? We're looking at a shallow recession, one that likely will be even shallower here in West Michigan, as long as we have NAFTA in place. That allows us to look at what workers do we need in 3 or 4 years and take advantage of the fact that other people are letting them go. Because we're going to have worker constraints in the United States for a good time to come. So think about it. Understand what you need to weather a short recession. Make sure you have it on hand. Make ready for the investments that you need for the next 2 years. Think about doing it earlier than later because your capital costs will go up. And then take advantage of the recession when it comes. Augment your workforce where you need it. Take advantage of automation where you can. And we'll still be on top when we come out. So what I'm telling you for the year ahead is keep the pedal to the metal, but do so thoughtfully. And thank you for having me here again this year.
We're so grateful that you're here today, and we are thankful for this past year that we had together to build and create and grow our wonderful community. We've had a great government that assists us in finding creative solutions to the problems at hand. You can see around, the residential development has just expanded exponentially. We also see manufacturing that is bursting at the seams. Our buildings are full and we're finding places to build more. We have an employment that's at full employment, but yet we need more workers, and we have to create a community that is attractive to those workers. Overall, it's been a phenomenal year, and we're really looking forward to this year, and we're thankful that we get to partner with you in this coming year. And as you hear, you'll see that there are positive and exciting things coming for our great community. Thank you for being here.
We have a great mix in our market of both the typical corporate America national retailers, and then we have these regionals that are much smaller platform, as well as the mom and pop retailers. Quite frankly, the nationals are recognizing how our world is changing and how the younger generations are spending money. Well, mom and pops have become much more sophisticated. They now own microbreweries and they own distilleries and farm-to-table restaurants, and they're the life behind all this urban retail development that's going on.
2016, we were predicting that 2017 was going to be a very tight market for industrial, that we were going to have a lot of new construction as a result of the lack of supply and the high amount of demand that was out there. We did see some new construction. Most all of it is owner and user driven.
For downtown new construction, we have 234 Market that has 30,000 square feet of office on the main floor and multifamily above that. In the suburbs, we have Heritage Point. They are pretty full now in their second phase, and they have a new phase going up it's planned for 2018.
Being in West Michigan, it's a hardworking value community, and that's one of the benefits. That's why a lot of us choose to live here. But it's also kept a lot of rates down in all of our industry. Now we're seeing with new construction that those rates have to go up. And with the new construction and rates going up, we haven't seen a pushback from the tenants on that. They want the amenities. They want the new space.
In 2017, we predicted that brick and mortar retail is not dead. And that played a significant factor throughout this past year with all the activity we had in our market. We've seen rental rates increase to all-time record highs. The U.S. Census Bureau released statistics in November of 2017 that the third quarter online retail sales accounted for 8.3% of all retail sales in the United States. And that is up 5% from 10 years ago. So the fact that retail sales online are less than 10% of all retail sales across the country, brick and mortar is still alive and well.
With increased investor activity, largely driven by outside capital from primary and secondary markets, it does create a constraint on available investments in the market, which does a few things. One, it's going to continue to keep pricing high. We don't anticipate significant cap rate compression. However, there will be cost increase in the capital to the investors. So as investors maybe get a little more aggressive, take slightly less yield, cap rates and pricing will largely stay the same due to the increased cost of the debt financing with increased interest rates.
From the buying perspective, although the market is still tight and there is a lack of supply, we are certainly better off than what a lot of the other major markets are. The reason that a lot of those investors would like to place money here is because of the fundamentals that we have here. So we have low cost of living, we have high quality of life, we have proximity to major markets, which is a huge thing for why manufacturers want to locate here. So when you look back to the downturn of 2008 and 9, we went into that faster than the rest of the country, but we also came out of it a lot faster than the rest of the country.
One of the great transactions and changes in the market that happened in 2017 was the redevelopment of the former Rogers Department Store, Klingman's Furniture Store on 28th Street Southwest in Wyoming. The significance there is 28th Street Southwest was our first main retail corridor anywhere in Western Michigan. Rogers Department Store was a staple there. When they left the market, Klingman's tried to utilize that building. That didn't work out for them. It's an older two-story retail building that's not useful in today's climate. This past year, that building was sold to a developer, and about 80% of that building has been converted into office.
Historically, West Michigan has not ever been an overbuilt industrial market. There's a lot of folks that are very hesitant to throw space up on a speculative basis. 5300 Broadmoor was a beautiful example of a gorgeous building that was put up 50,000 square feet. That was going to demand a higher price per square foot. You're going to be in the $5 plus square foot range, which is historically fairly high for what West Michiganders are willing to pay. It was a speculative build completely. You have two 25,000 square foot users that are in there, and they're both on 5+ year leases. So that was a great example of how speculative construction, as long as you're building quality product that can deliver to both the manufacturer as well as the distribution type of a company, you can get higher rates today because there's no real other place or alternative to go to.
The average vacancy rate in our main retail corridors is just below 9%. However, realistically, the vacancy rate amongst Class A type of retail space is almost non-existent. And that's where you saw the creativity of Chick-fil-A at Centerpoint Mall. I mean, that site's been there for forever. And then all of a sudden, they were able to discover that, hey, we can squeeze in here and there's plenty of room for everybody still.
The speculative construction market, although we would like to see a little bit more of it, the cost of construction is what was really prohibitive to that. To be able to generate the returns that you would need as an investor in that kind of real estate while also trying to hit your target rental rates per square foot, that is a little bit of a struggle today. We saw some of it in 2017, probably not as much as what we would have liked, but you know, it's still out there.
Last year we talked about parking constraints being an issue for downtown and downtown adjacent users, and it's still a constraint.
It's the number one thing that I'm hearing from tenants, landlords, developers, and I think the city of Grand Rapids has had the attitude that you can't build your way out of a parking crisis, and I don't think that's a viable approach.
There are answers to the parking constraints, but in the short run, I'm seeing tenants that are wanting to relocate out of downtown because not just the expense of parking, but the availability of parking isn't there.
So in the meantime, we do have to build our way out of the parking crisis. There is no silver bullet. It needs to be a collaborative approach that we really focus on how to really solve this problem.
2018, I think we're going to be in the same kind of a boat that's there. Demand is still heavy. We're at vacancy rates that are as low as we've seen, I think, pretty much ever. When you have a need for additional capacity, you have to go look at building it. So even though the cost of construction is high today, you know, you're gonna, if you need that capacity and you want to continue to have a presence here in West Michigan, that's the road you're going to have to go down.
We cannot stretch Alpine Avenue too much further, the core area, or 28th Street Southeast, or Rivertown. So that's where we're really going to be working hard in 2018, is trying to figure out the demand that we are getting from both local and national retailers that still want a home in greater Grand Rapids, West Michigan. Where is that home going to be?
The remaining issues are going to be inventory and excess capital. We hope for a slightly better year in 2018. However, it's pretty well telegraphed that interest rates are going to continue to steadily bump up.
We are in a very active economy. We're in a healthy economy. We're in a very resilient economy. There's been a lot of stuff happening around the world that is very significant, but it's not slowing the economy down.
I think we've got fantastic energy going. I think that the downtown is really thriving. Overall, people want to be in West Michigan. It's a place where they want to raise their families. We've got a vibrant downtown community. We're getting more and more people living downtown, and it just continues to feed itself.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that part of the presentation, and we really look forward to working with you in the future on some of these ideas that were presented. Next up, we have a gentleman named Chris Slocky, who is the Innovation Officer of Colliers out of the Denver office, and he'll do a short presentation on some exciting things occurring in the industry. Following that, there will be a panel of experts, and that'll be hosted by Jeff Hayner, our Senior Research Analyst. And then that'll be followed by a Q&A, so there's certainly opportunity for you to participate and get your questions answered. Thank you again for your participation.
As Duke mentioned in the video, my name is Jeff Hayner. I'm our Senior Research Analyst. Following our short video here, I'm going to introduce Chris Slocky, who's Head of Innovation for Corporate Services out of our Denver office with Colliers. He's going to put together a short presentation for you, and then we will continue the presentation with a panel discussion following that. And then a short Q&A with the audience available to answer ask some questions. So with that being said, I'd like to introduce Chris, and we'll continue the conversation after he's done.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks for the Colliers team for inviting me to West Michigan on a balmy day in January. Can we advance? Oh, wait, I need the clicker. Where is the clicker? Oh, here it is. Sorry. So I'm going to talk today and play up a little bit on what Dean Lawson introduced around growing talent and what Dr. Isley talked about, sort of looking out into the future beyond the economic forecast. What does it really mean? What are the things that are reshaping or going to reshape our entire economy? So as introduced, I'm the head of innovation for our corporate solutions practice, and I think what that fancy title means, I oversee our management consulting practice. So anything dealing with portfolio strategy, location strategy, supply chain and logistics optimization falls within my team's purview. Also, Colliers 360 and our technology solutions practice, where we're helping companies look at future data and be able to attach that to their portfolio and see how they're impacting their future, as well as any process improvements within our corporate solutions group. So that's really my role within the business. And so with that, what I like to tell our team and what we try to do is, since we're in Michigan, leverage the Henry Ford quote, right? If they asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. I think we're living in that era, and we're about to see some radical change across business, across multiple industries, and what's going to happen to both operations and the impact to real estate is going to be very, create a lot of change. We're going to be, or we are in the midst, or at the beginning of what I call, or not me, but it's been coined by others, the fourth industrial revolution. And there's going to be this convergence of disruptive forces, and I think there are three key areas that are going to continue to affect corporate real estate and the way we occupy space. The first is people. How people work and the way they work is changing, and it's going to continue to radically change over time. The second, technology. We're in the midst of this new revolution of automation and artificial intelligence, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And then the third is place. Where we work and how that work gets done is going to be critical. So I'm coining this notion of we're moving into this digital world. So where Dr. Isley talked about, running out of labor, that may actually be a good thing in some of your industries here in West Michigan, because some of the tools and technology may pick up that slack in order to improve how you're performing. And what's going to be the output of all this? In the next 25 years, economists, management consultants, advisors envision that productivity is going to double over this time frame. It's rose pretty rapidly since 1990, but think about the job you're doing today and now doing it in half amount of time, or doubling the work that you're doing today. And that's all going to be driven by this shift to this digital, automated age that we're embarking on, or continuing to grow on. And so playing on some comments, again, that Dr. Isley made, as well as what Dean Lawson mentioned, this notion of millennials. They're now 50% of the workforce. We were always talking about them emerging and taking over. Well, they have taken over. And this generation was the first generation to grow up with technology in their hands. They value a work-life balance, and they tend to be more urban in their thinking. They want to get back to community. So all those things are affecting where they work and how we actually use real estate and how they're seeing real estate as an enabler for change. Coupled with that, there's this huge movement, an Uberization, or a movement to the freelance economy. It's estimated that 40 to 50% of the workforce, knowledge management workforce, or 60 million Americans are going to be freelancers. That means they're going to work for 3 different companies in the same week, and they're going to have that flexibility. Where do those people work? Do they work out of their home? Do they work in one company or multiple companies? It's going to be a continued significant shift in the way we think about procuring and leveraging an enabled workforce. Coupled with that, the way work is changing. Over 80% of work is collaborative today. 30 years ago, it may have been 20 to 30%. You're heads down at a desk, going to work every day, and then going home in the evening. Now we have distributed work. We're working on teams locally, we're working with them globally, and a majority of that work's getting done in a collaborative environment. Think about the way offices are configured. Are they built to handle that kind of teaming? No. There's a huge building obsolescence problem when we think about traditional work and how we're supporting that work and how teams come together. So we're going to see a shift in this notion of what a dedicated desk is versus something that's more collaborative and more focused on that kind of change. Mobility, another big trend. 50 billion connected devices by 2025. There are only going to be 8 billion people on the planet. So what that means is everything's going to be connected. The Internet of Things. Our phone's going to be connected to our homes, if it's not already, to our offices, to predictive analytics, and it's all going to be talking to one another. And we're going to be able to do it from our handheld device. Should probably be holding my phone, sorry. But all that's going to change, continue to change the notion of one person and one desk or where we sit. We're already challenged with that. We work in a Starbucks, we work in airports, we work at home, we work in our cars. And this no longer the need to being tethered at your desk with a laptop, and we all know that, is going to continue to push the way we think about traditional space and where it's going. So this notion of everything connected, this 50 billion devices as to how they're coming together, everything from buildings being connected to supply chain to actually commercialization of goods or sourcing of goods is all going to be seamless and, for the most part, automated. It's all going to be predicted, it's all going to be drawn based on consumption, and this notion of real time is going to come closer and closer to reality of how we get goods. The big kicker in all this is AI and automation. 30 to 40%, or many, again, industry experts predict that 30 to 40% of all jobs are going to be affected as a result of some form of AI or automation. If you're in the financial services industry or something like the insurance industry that's pretty much still paper-driven or labor-intensive, we're going to see a lot of those processes get streamlined through machine learning and artificial intelligence, and that could affect the way people work and where they work on some of those different tasks. Space as a service. This notion of, hey, I can get a cab, an Uber, a Lyft, a hotel room overnight, Airbnb. We're now going to see that enter the office space. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but the notion of a fixed lease for 5 to 10 years is now going to be challenged by a desk for a day, 200 people for a month, 1,000 people for a year. So that being able to just seamlessly collect supply and demand and have that open source is going to be there's going to be a real continued change in that movement. And then work-life integration, as I mentioned, millennials. As fast-paced as they are and love to build a family and want to have a community and collaborative culture, what's really still important to them is space. 70% of all millennials still said that space matters to them in the office, and they're willing to look at other benefits that give them a creative and inviting space to be able to manage their business or to lead the teams that they're working with. So what does all this mean and where it's going? What are these trends doing? So McKinsey came up with a study that said as a result of AI and automation, most of the work, as you can imagine, that's routinized or consistent or done in a similar fashion over and over on that right-hand side, predictable work, is probably where it's going to be most affected. Knowledge management, leaders, CEOs, executives, people who are managing complex problems, we're probably still safe with our jobs in this era as it continues to emerge. I mean, cognitive learning and the ability for humans to interact as we all know, is core and critical to business and business change. And so we're probably safe when it comes to looking at that where we're going to be relative to work and how it's going to affect our business. So Inc. magazine did a survey of experts in technology and in business, and there are 5 different sectors that are ripe for disruption, and real estate's one of them. And so where will this disruption occur? I think it's going to happen in 5 key areas. The way we buy real estate and how we source renters to landlords, the sales and finance of real estate, the occupancy, the management, and then how we buy or source utilities is going to change. So in this buy space, I mentioned space on demand. Has anyone heard of liquid space? Interesting. So liquid space is an online portal like Airbnb where you can go and you can source on-demand space, whether you need space for a month, a week, a day, whether you're 1 person or you're 200 people. And it's a new digital technology, and all it is it's a portal connecting those who have space to those who need space. And all the service providers, including Colliers, are part of their vendor network. And again, it's going to continue to build to be able to source and provide those opportunities to our clients so that they don't have to look at a fixed lease as a potential solution. WeWork. How many of you have heard of co-working? Great. So we know that phenomenon is rising. And what that has done, similar to the digital portal, we now have space that if I'm a small company, a startup, I can go in and I can rent space, not even rent space, lease a seat for a month. And I can scale that based on my growth. I don't have to take 5,000 square feet for 3 years. I can take 10 seats for 1 month, 20 seats for 6 months, 50 seats for a year. And that's creating a lot of opportunities for cost savings, so much so that their biggest growth right now is in enterprise. IBM in downtown Manhattan just took a full building for 600 employees managed by Liquid Space. Managed by WeWork. Nike had WeWork develop a full product development center out in Portland for their new advanced technology practice. Amazon has over 6,000 employees right now in Liquid Space sites. And what does it do? It creates flexibility and gives them other opportunities. The value proposition there is, if you haven't been in one, it's really cool space. It aligns with Z-Gen and millennial opportunities. It's flexible, and then it also, you're building with other companies, so you get to have a shared or borrowed economy or have a connected culture. The result of that is in cities like New York, where you're spending about $14,000 to $15,000 a seat, that's cutting the seat price down to almost half or even less in some cases. So it's creating alternatives around flexibility and more cost effectiveness. Take a typical transaction. If we're looking at buying, this notion of very labor intensive, all those people down at the bottom, you might see a reduction in how transactions get done if automation comes in. When you know a lease is expiring, it's automatically a digital tool searching the market. It's providing you a market survey. It's doing some background analysis and presenting you options. So the broker or someone involved in this is really going to be focused on quality control, negotiation, and managing and shifting somewhat of the responsibilities of how that gets affected. Blockchain. How many of you have heard of blockchain? So blockchain hasn't hit real estate in a big way, but it's coming. Blockchain is the backbone technology for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. And all this technology means is an open ledger. So think of your old checkbook that you used to balance. You had a record that you used to write down for each property or for each transaction in your bank account. With blockchain, every property is going to be open source. So one of the challenges that we had in the past, or still do, is how do we get access in the history of any property or any location? This is going to solve that globally. You'll be able to go into a property eventually and see the full history of occupancy, of cost, of all those of the transactions That's all going to become relevant. I mentioned this notion of Internet of Things, the whole integrated supply chain network. When you go into a Kohl's or a Target and you buy something off the shelf, it's automatically making that product either locally or globally to resource it to you. So all these different systems are going to be interconnected to provide more adaptable just-in-time solutions. Digital world technologies. Even in our business, when we look at how we occupy space and measure it, we're working with technologies like Alexa to be able to tie in market data and portfolio data to ask questions and have it answer you. I mean, and this has just emerged in the last 3 to 6 months. So rather than having to look data up, you can actually ask and speak back and forth to a piece of technology to give you that data. Virtual reality. There's some questioning whether we even need offices. I don't think that's going to happen. But the notion is you could put on a VR headset and you can be in a conference room with everybody very quickly. So you have that virtual, collaboration. Artificial intelligence, being able to track occupancy levels within buildings, so you have a lot of flexibility. And then things like bots and automation in our business, really looking at future forecasting of where markets are going and how occupancy trends are leveraged within a portfolio. The last piece is smart buildings, and we've seen a lot of technology come into buildings to be able to control and manage them and more effectively leverage sustainable practices and be right-sized for what's needed for that building. But what hasn't happened is sort of the infrastructure layer to manage all that. Well, what's going to happen is buildings are now going to be pulling that energy when we have an integrated management technology platform at the top that's going to allow it to self-sufficiently draw on demand what it needs to run more effectively. So you're going to start to see an emergence of a lot of that middleware or software to be able to manage that. We're going to see this notion of labor. Labor is everything in the world right now. So this notion that used to be out there, one person per one floor, now being able to look at, with all technology, mobility, commingling, that if you need to hire 5 product engineers somewhere and you don't have an office, you may leverage a service partner or someone else's office to be able to draw that talent in another location rather than having to source a particular location. So, taking a breath, what does that mean to you and to us in real estate? I think it means this notion of there's much more flexibility and options. This notion of one lease for a fixed period with a certain amount of space for a number of time is going to shift. And there's going to be more models to challenge that. It also, the way we use space is going to change dramatically. I don't think one person per one desk, and I know we've stretched that a lot with mobility and some desk sharing. I think we're going to go much further. I think the office of the future is going to look much more like a campus commons or a place to meet, gather, do your work, and then go off and challenge the rest of your day, or do the rest of the work you need to do in the rest of your day. And then I think this notion of building obsolescence is going to be a real challenge as well with technology. What do we do with all this space? I think we'll see a constant churn, and there'll be a recycling and new space needed, but the question of a building today and whether it can support sort of the needs of future work is really going to continue to be challenged. So with that, I want to thank you for giving me the stage for, how long did I take, Jeff? 15 minutes? Did I make it? All right. So a lot to talk about in 15 minutes, but just wanted to share with you some things that we're working on and advising clients on, and I think is going to continue to push sort of your economy forward. Very entrepreneurial region, and it's going to be great to see how you're going to advance and the region is going to continue to advance and embrace these trends as they emerge. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Really cool to have a kind of a new element to our event this year, and the fact that our company has people that are working on, cutting edge innovation in the workplace and whatnot, and to be able to share some of that insight with you guys. I'm glad you are here from Denver. Before I introduce our panel, I'd just like to say thank you again to our sponsors. Grand Valley State's been a great partner for a number of years. Fifth Third Bank as our leader sponsor, so thank you for that. And I just wanted to say, wow, lots of people in the audience today. I think this is probably the most people we've ever had at one of our events, so we continue to kind of push the envelope and increase the event every year. So thank you all for your continued support and partnership. With that, I will introduce our panel discussion. So Chris Lockey is our head of innovation, as we talked about. Tom Litzler, if you'd like to come up as well. He is the executive vice president and COO of Showstack Brothers out of Livonia, a commercial real estate firm. Mike Mraz, managing partner and head of development for Rockford Construction. J.D. Lokes, president of Celebration Cinemas. Birgit Close, who's president and CEO of The Right Place, our local economic development corporation, and Dave Rapp, who's from our own office, investment specialist, land specialist, to talk about some of the trends he's seeing locally. So please join me in welcoming everybody on the panel. And thank you all. So one thing Mike Murray spoke about in the video was the fact that bricks and mortar retail is not dead. So I'd like to kind of kick it off with a question directed first to Tom, but then I'd like this to be as much of a discussion as possible, so please feel free to chime in, and if it's not a question directed directly to you, please feel free though. So Tom, retail kind of specialist, is bricks and mortar dead?
No, first of all, Jeff, thanks for having me, and thanks for Colliers. This is a great venue, and happy to be here. To echo what's been said earlier, the bold headline is really that the internet and e-commerce are only taking up about 9 to 10% of the retail sales right now, so that's really a limited impact in the scheme of things. But if we turn back the clock a couple of generations, retail has really transformed over the years. 50, 60 years ago, retail was really a Main Street venture. From there, it evolved to the malls and to suburban venues and then to strip centers and to what have you. And then as time went on, retail morphed and there's been different kinds of retail changes. But back then, even all the retail wasn't brick and mortar. If you think about it, there were catalogs. I mean, many of us can remember the catalogs that would come in the mail years and years ago, and we would order things through the mail, which was the equivalent of online years ago. And as time went on, retail formats changed. They moved into central business districts back recently. So what we're seeing really now is a change, and it's a change that retail has gone through over the years. And certainly there will be a shakeout, and some of the department stores will change, and some of the boxes will change, but there'll be readaptive uses for that. So it's certainly not changed.
Mike, from a development standpoint, what do you guys think about the retail landscape and how it's shifting?
Well, it's interesting because we see that shift as well, where in the urban context, we see a lot more gathering places, food and beverage, coffee shops, breweries, bars, restaurants, because of course, you can shop online, you can do so much online, but we're humans, we need social interaction, and that's where people want to have that social interaction, and do it after work or at lunch or breakfast meetings. We see it all the time a lot in our retailers. We've seen a shift also that this was in the last recession, is that there was a shift from the larger scale retailers downtown to entrepreneurs that wanted to start a retail business but didn't have the financial capacity or the commitment to be able to have the 5-year leases, the larger shops. And that's really where we created our retail incubator on Monroe Center, because we're getting a lot of calls, but we didn't have the space to accommodate groups like that. So we mashed it all together, took the risk as a landlord to spend that capital improvements, and we've successfully graduated, if for lack of a better term, retailers into their own space so they can have that street level presence.
Sure. Yeah, I think a big theme that we saw in 2017 was the continuation of mixed-use properties. And I'd like to actually talk to JD because your company is involved in a project downtown as well. So can you tell me a little bit about your company, where you guys have been, where you're going, and a little bit about the mixed-use property downtown?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everybody. It's a little hard to answer that question without going back all the way to the beginning. We got our start actually with two significant businesses in the mid-'40s in downtown Grand Rapids, the first being the Boatland Sports Show that became the Showspan Company that produces now the Wine and Fine Food Show, and most importantly for everybody in this room, the Camper Travel and RV Show, which opens tomorrow at 3 o'clock. And you can get your tickets online and at the box office. We also got our start with the acquisition of the Midtown Theater in 1944 that was showing newsreel footage. As I look at the history of our business, there are a lot of people that talk about changes in technology and how that will have an impact on retail, of which we consider ourselves part of that segment. Read a newspaper article recently that talked about the imminent demise of the movie theaters as a result of technology. It was dated 1956, referring to the advent of television, and the reality is we had a record year in the national box office in 2016, and one that nearly mimicked it in this past year too. So we're doing quite well even in the advent of a lot of new technology changes. We abandoned, with the theater operation, a lot of retail. We abandoned downtown somewhere around the 60s, as did many other retailers. We made our fortunes out in the suburbs, and that was the way that things went as a result of crime and parking and a number of other issues that we've been continuing to try and work on as a community and a lot of different communities across the country. That led to sort of a sleepy, boring downtown. We had great consumer shows, but there was not a lot going on as I was growing up in Grand Rapids in the 90s and such. And I left Grand Rapids around 2001 and really didn't expect to come back. I didn't see how this was necessarily a place that I wanted to live as a young professional. And I came back to visit a few years later and was really inspired by what had changed, the momentum that had changed in Grand Rapids, by a lot of people in this room, frankly, who invested a lot of money in taking a risk on our community, investing in the arena and the Bob and a lot of other restaurants, reinvesting in a lot of our office spaces to make sure that they were vibrant and places that people wanted to work. And I was inspired by that and felt like that there was an opportunity for our companies to play a role in that. So coming back nearly 12 years ago or so, trying to figure out, recognizing that in order for a region to be healthy, we really needed a vibrant core. And so we've been trying to explore that, how we can be one of those layers that creates a little bit of impetus for trying to invigorate the core of Grand Rapids, and in a way that we believe will create a bit of a rising tide effect and have a positive impact on the entire region. And so we started looking at a relatively small $10 million project about 10 years ago, and yada, yada, yada. It's about a $160 million project today that will involve a lot of mixed use, pretty much everything other than industrial, from Class A office to hospitality, a number of different entertainment venues, including a movie theater, recreational outdoor space, restaurants, apartments, condos, and 947, give or take, parking spaces that will help towards that problem.
I was going to wait to bring up parking, but since you opened that door, what is your opinion on the downtown parking crunch and the shift of mindset within the community? And I'd like to get Mike's take on that as well. What do you see in 2018 as kind of the parking situation shaping up?
You want to say rock, paper, scissors?
Sorry to
after it, aren't you?
Throw you under the.
So I've lived, breathed downtown real estate for 15 years in redevelopment, and I heard for about 15 years talking about grocery, and then immediately now I think when you hear what about parking for a long time. No, I mean, joking aside, what you heard in the presentation and on stage here is true. And so there are people having the potential to turn away because of that. And there is a culture shift that is happening. It's going to happen. We hear about adaptive reuse of parking decks in the future to become office space. So there's technology and design functions that are being researched. The advent of car sharing, Uber, Lyft, you name it. And then of course autonomous vehicles, and when will that happen, and how many people will really participate. I mean, it's really kind of a crystal ball, unfortunately. And I think David Weiner said there's no magic bullet on that. Mm-hmm. What we see, though, too, is at least currently there is a demand for parking, and this city and this state is auto-centric. And whether development requires on-site or nearby parking or not, as an investor, we still have to understand the marketability of a project if you have or do not have parking or reliable mass transit that is located nearby. And so we're venturing into where we used to rely on in Central Business District, public parking ramps. We're now, just like in JD's development, even on the west side with our Bridge Street Market project, developing a near 300-car parking space, because that is what really our tenants and our customers demand right now.
So you guys have been talking about the core quite a bit, and we see a lot of cranes in the sky in the core. I'd like to pick Dave's brain a little bit about what's going on in the suburbs, and you're kind of a development expert, land acquisition expert. Outside of downtown, what exciting things what trends, what projects are you working on, and what are you seeing for 2018?
So in 2018, I think 2018 is going to be very similar to 2017. I think that there's going to be a lot of activity in the suburbs, all product types. There's activity I can think of just about in every category. We're challenged with good pad-ready sites, I think, across the suburbs. There's not a lot of stuff that's sitting there ready to go. And then we're challenged with construction costs. I mean, that's a construction costs as well as, vertical and horizontal construction costs. There's certainly a lack of people, a lack of, the willingness, I think, to go out and put infrastructure in as well. So, we're going to continue to see growth in the burbs. I'm personally very active, working on sites. There are definitely some categories that have the ability to sort of ignore the whole construction component. I think the biggest category that's fighting that right now is the industrial market. I think we would see a lot more speculation out there, spec buildings going up if we didn't have that challenge right now. So there's kind of a good and bad of that. We need the space, but at the same time, we're not oversupplying our market as well because of that. So.
You want to expand on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's
side of things?
In terms of construction pricing going up, there's two factors to this too. It's materials and labor. And the materials, as we heard about the commodity pricing and where that is shifted, much of what we work on much of what the construction industry relies on is through petroleum products. And so that you saw the rise and then a little bit of a plateau, not really quite a plateau, but a stabilization. But the labor is what is quite interesting too. So the loss of the labor during the recession was dramatic, the sharp decline, and people either left Michigan or they left the industry altogether. As the climb came back out of the recession, trade contractors started to hire again, but not at the capacity that they were before, because they don't want to be necessarily overextended again for this next potential downturn. So that's where you're seeing the raise in labor rates, but also the lack of people. So when you look at opportunities for projects that are coming along, they may not necessarily take all of them, or the pricing will vary due to those complications.
Sure. Yeah. multiple times we've talked about today, lack of skilled labor, trying to bring talent back to West Michigan. Birgit, I'd like to get your thoughts on what we're doing as a community, as an economic development corporation to, address that situation and bring skilled labor back to West Michigan.
Yep, thanks, Jeff. And good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be collaborating with you and everybody here. It's come up, I think, from every speaker is the issue of qualified talent, and I want to underline qualified talent because while we have a very low unemployment rate in West Michigan, around 3.1, 3.2%, we still have non-participating citizens in the labor market in our community. And Dr. Isley touched on it in terms of are we looking at those folks who have been left out of this success we've had over the last 7-8 years, and where are they, and how do we train them, and how do we get them re-engaged? It's a systemic issue, and it needs to be addressed systemically, and if anybody's looking for a silver bullet, there isn't one, because you have to really look at where is that labor market, how can we train those folks, and yes, that will include those who are non-violent felons who are coming out of prison, who need a job. There are a number of things that the right place with partners, and I want to underline partners, is engaged in, and that includes obviously all of our higher ed institutions, but also the community college. West Michigan Works, which is a big partner in terms of where do we find that labor, how do we retrain it. In about 2 months, in April, I believe, we're taking again 9,000 students, high school students, through this facility and showing them what everybody here has to offer in their individual businesses. In other words, what does a contemporary manufacturing job look like? What does a contemporary construction job look like? Industry, the IT industry, et cetera, et cetera. And most of these students don't get exposed to this. So what we're trying to do with partners, particularly West Michigan Works, is this is what is happening in today's contemporary labor market. It's not your grandfather's Oldsmobile factory.
Sure.
And so that's a real shift. And the people we have to convince are students. We have to convince them earlier in high school, not in high school, but in middle school. And we have to really get a systemic system that it's not just about 4-year degrees, it's about this and that. It's about not either or. It's not about being an apprentice for a tool and die maker or going to Grand Valley State University. Maybe you need to offer that young person the opportunity to look at both. So we have really to build up a systemic system that really addresses this from early childhood to reading in 3rd grade to high school, and then what's after that. And I don't think we're there yet. It's too disparate. But immediately, we also collaborate with an organization that's now co-housed with the right place called Hello West Michigan. And for those of you who don't know, Cindy Brown and her team, they do talent attraction to the community, and they go about it in a very systemic way. They look at regions of the United States where there are layoffs, and then look at, through LinkedIn as well as Facebook, who has a connection to West Michigan. Did you go to school here? Did you grow up here? And like JD left because there was nothing to do here, right? And you want to come home, and you're visiting your parents, and you're saying, oh, a lot of things have changed. Maybe I want to be in this community. And one of their main events, I'm sure some of you have participated, is Rethink West Michigan, which is the night before Thanksgiving.
Yep.
And Cindy and her team host about 150 folks at the Bob. It's really a speed dating over beers is what it is. And it is really connecting former West Michiganders with job opportunities so they can come back. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this area, but we got to make it systemic.
So the right place, I think when a lot of people think of the right place, they think of
business attraction.
Right. But retention is a huge goal and success of the right place as well. Right. And as we're talking about talent attraction, we also need to talk about retention.
That's
right. And I'd like to get Chris's opinion on it as well in terms of innovation in the workplace and how we're not only attracting talent, but we're retaining talent based on workspace.
If I may?
Yeah.
We spend 80% of our time at the right place, making sure that the companies, all of you who are already here, get the same service and the same help that somebody who wants to come new.
Yep.
So last year we did 22 projects, and of those 18 were local West Michigan businesses who wanted to grow and expand here. And if we don't take care of them, they might look at Indiana and say that looks so much better, and we don't want to be doing that, right? So.
Yeah, I want to play on your train of thought, because I think, I'm lucky enough to live in a great city, Denver, as well, a great community, and we've been the #1 growth economy for 3 out of the last 5 years, and it all comes down to talent. We have a hearty number of millennials moving there, and there's a lot to do there. So I can't underestimate the importance of that. Being an advisor on the EDC, when we see companies who want to move to Denver, it's about that blend of talent, culture, an inclusive culture, right? An open community. That's really important, that you provide that space. But playing on what you said, 65% of all jobs in the next 10 years haven't been invented yet. So there's a great opportunity to think about what is a manufacturer of the future. They need a degree. They're going to be running diagnostics, analytics. They're not going to be using a hammer. Was speaking to the global head of real estate facilities at Time Warner, Steve Lefkowitz, and he said that exact quote. He goes, everyone's talking about smart business buildings. I can't find a smart building engineer. We're not growing them. We're implementing all this great technology. We don't have people to run it. They're usually guys who are using a wrench, or they're guys behind a computer. We need to find these new education opportunities to build, to play on this new digital economy that's continuing to emerge. And I think there's a great opportunity in a region like this to play off both the great education workforce and certainly the great industrial footprint and manufacturing footprint. So getting to retention, though, Forbes magazine last year said the #1 thing that HR should be focused on is creating the culture and space that they need to retain talent. If you do not have a modern workplace today, remember, you're competing for talent pools to go to Chicago or San Francisco or Denver or Austin, and the places that people are creating are really dynamic, including amenities, providing things that are at someone's fingertips, whether it's retail or daycare or just common things that you need, they've got to be near you. So if you're going to get that talent pool and you're going to keep them, it's got to be a really sort of culture-fitting space for you to make sure that it aligns with your business and what you're trying to portray. It can't be someone else's space that you saw. It has to fit what you're trying to enable, and it also has to be really enticing to want to keep someone there. The workday is 14 to 16 hours today. It's, people use the term work is where you used to go. Now it's what you do. We're in that space a long time, and providing a diversity of place, a diversity of space to get that work done is really, I think, why companies are succeeding, because they give that place to be innovative, they give that place to share, and that's why people are engaged and want to be in a location. And it's critical today to a talent retention strategy.
Did you want to?
Well, I couldn't agree more. You said a word that I think we need to remember in West Michigan, and that is we need to be an inclusive and a welcoming community. Over the last 20 years, the community has really changed. When we used to talk to new companies who wanted to come here, yes, everybody talked about quality of life, but it did not play a terribly big role in the decision-making process. They wanted to have a good building, et cetera, and then that sort of was an afterthought. It has become a very, very big thought in the very first few conversations that you have, because it is about talent retention and attraction.
Right.
And if you do not have that quality of life, and frankly, I think we've done a phenomenal job in Grand Rapids over the last 20 years to really change the city into a very dynamic, very, very, a city where you want to be. And that's why when Dean Lawson talked about her business students, 60% of them stay here, that's a pretty high percentage, okay? To have that kind of retention, and I know the engineering school at Grand Valley has a very, very high retention rate as well. But it also has to be inclusive in the sense of that we need to reach out to communities who don't look like me and who are going to be welcome here. And welcoming somebody and making somebody feel they belong is a very different conversation. And as a region, we need to be thinking about how do we get much more welcoming to those. We keep talking about talent retention, yes, but we also need to talk about talent attraction. And when we attract people here, then we need to make them all part of the community. And we think we're very welcoming, and we are, but then how do you make them feel that they belong? And that's, and then they become sticky and they stay and they become part of it. So that's something that we really need to work on.
And if you look at, Amazon's going through their headquarters of the future, their second generation, their number one criteria isn't, I want incentives. They're not even going to take incentives, in my estimation. It's being an inclusive community.
I'm glad to hear they don't want incentives.
Yeah, well, it's in their best interest, right? I'm sure there's going to be a healthy, but that's not what they're looking for. Their criteria are really sophisticated when you look at, they want their community to be an Amazon community, an Amazon culture, and want their community to reflect that.
Yeah, the other thing we talked about is the whole connectedness, and we are still a very, very smart manufacturing region, and the whole connectivity with artificial intelligence, we need to, in Europe they're already doing this, it's called Industry 4.0, and it's really to have your entire system and what you're making from the purchase order that hits your desk, via your smartphone, all the way to that part leaves your door. It's total connectivity. It's going to change the kind of jobs that are in that company. Totally. It's beyond automation. We talk about automation, but Industry 4.0 is beyond that. There is one company here, it's Diecastle up in Greenville, and they make aluminum wheels, right? It's a die casting company. It looks like a laboratory. It's probably cleaner than my kitchen. So I'm not kidding. So that's the workplace of the future, and it's very contemporary. It's very inclusive. It's a very different work environment, and that connectivity is going to continue to happen in our companies.
I was just going to say, I like JD. I left Grand Rapids for a lot of reasons back in the early 2000s, and a lot of it had to do with the lifestyle here and kind of Grand Rapids. I grew up in Chicago, was expecting certain things in the marketplace, and I think, when we were looking at moving back to the Midwest more from personal reasons, I remember having the conversations with my wife about where we were going to go, and we talked about Denver, we talked about Chicago, we talked about Grand Rapids, and when we looked at Grand Rapids, there were so many reasons why it made sense to come here, and I think that there's so many reasons why people are moving here. There's so many great things going on here. It's not just companies, but it's people, but it's so important for us to really focus on lifestyle here and continuing to enhance that, whether it's restaurants and things to do and the lakeshore, enhancing the great beaches we have. And pretty much everybody that comes here from out of market is so surprised at how beautiful it is here and the quality of life that you have here. So I think we just need to focus on getting people here because we need people to fill those jobs and continue our growth.
Yeah. Jeff, I want to add one point to that. Thanks. Well, we're talking about talent and retention and attraction. Everybody that I talk to here, whether they're in the office sector, the warehouse sector, the retail sector, talking about building buildings, rehabbing buildings, everyone's concerned about construction costs and construction timing. And part of the answer to that is skilled trades. We don't have enough people. Everyone's talking about, lean manufacturing and white-collar jobs. We need more people in the skilled trades. We need to make those trades attractive, and we need to get people in them while they're young so that they can help drive these construction costs down. We need competition in construction because otherwise we're going to continue to see, thwarted yields on our projects, and it's going to, stifle economic growth.
Yeah, and I just wanted to ask you, as we're talking about kind of attracting talent from outside of the market and you being relatively outside of the market, but doing a lot of business in West Michigan and Grand Rapids, what is it about West Michigan and Grand Rapids in particular that brings you over here, brings you back doing business?
Good question. I've worked most of my career in southeastern Michigan and some of it in Chicago, but I've done a lot of business in western Michigan, primarily with Spartan Nash and with Meyer. There's a lot of good attributes over here. It's cost of living. It is, believe it or not, good work ethic. It is, let me see, wrote these down. It's a very diversified economic base. Unlike Chicago, where it's very commercially oriented, or Detroit, where it's more manufacturing oriented, there's a lot of different businesses over here. So the volatility in the business cycles isn't as great here because you're in agriculture, you're in food, you're in healthcare, you're in distribution, you're in warehousing. So all those elements to diversify your economy make it attractive. It's a business-friendly part of the world. There's a lot of places in the southeastern part of the state where you run into communities that are more regulatory, more selective, a lot harder to deal with. You don't run into that as much in western Michigan. Cities, counties, support groups are generally much more supportive to business. And then, the big point is really ease of access. You're close to I-69, you're close to 94, you're close to the turnpikes, close to Chicago, close to Detroit, close to a lot of important marketplaces that you could get to quickly, and it's really, it's cheaper, it's more efficient to do business here. So it's really a combination of those reasons.
Okay. Well, I'd like to tag on to a couple of things that were just said. And one of the things that will let us, and Dr. Isley mentioned it, that we will ride out the next recession probably more shallow, is in fact that over the last 20 years, this region has immensely diversified. I mean, we are a tremendous manufacturing sector, and we continue to be. We're proud of that because we believe that obviously it creates a lot of wealth. But we have today, it was mentioned ag, but food processing, a huge sector that we work in, continues to grow. Obviously, but a lot of the billions that were mentioned under the NAFTA conversation are in ag and food processing. 21 years ago, there was no such thing as a life sciences sector here, right? It was nothing. But today we are a Midwestern hub for the health and life sciences. Just go up and down the hill and south of the hill and in Wyoming, what we have built here in 20 years, literally from scratch, has been quite remarkable. And then our information technology sector, a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of small businesses, but they're growing very rapidly. Only constrained by that word we kept using, talent. But we have a basket of industries today that is a lot more diverse than it was 10, 15 years ago, which gives us an easier way to ride out difficult times.
Sure. Back to the commercial real estate side of things, kind of question for anybody that wants to answer. In 2018, is there a new corridor, or is there a new area of the market that we're going to see a lot of activity? I know we've talked a lot about M6 Broadmoor. JD, you have the Studio 28 lot on 28th Street Southwest. We talked about the Klingman's building being repurposed. Is there an area at the west side with Mike and what Rockford Construction's doing, Bridge Street? Is there a certain area that we see some activity coming from?
I can answer, respond to that. We're still filling holes, I think, from the downturn, so it depends what you're talking about. But I think, really what we need is residential growth in certain areas too, because that drives so many different factors. That it drives retail. Retailers want to be in certain markets. It drives, some office uses. From an industrial standpoint, I think there's growth, all around the ring. Infrastructure would be great. You just look at M6, what that did, over the 12, 13 years since it's been built. Look at the expansion. So if we have some, money that goes towards infrastructure and some new interchanges, and that's going to definitely stimulate some activity as well too. So, focused on, when I say residential too, I think it's important that we also start having some conversations about different types of residential product too. We tend to build the same product over and over in West Michigan. In the burbs. I mean, we start talking about townhomes and different types of condos and some stacked condos downtown. Downtown has historically been a rental conversation, so there's some diversification that needs to happen there as well too. Okay. But the trends are, all positive.
I can't speak to the trends as well as David can, but I can say what I would hope is that rather than trying to grow our sandbox so much that we continue to reinvest within the sandbox we have. We've got a lot of areas that I think you mentioned a number of them, including the 28th Street corridor, where there's a lot of opportunity. I think that we are experiencing some heating up conversations on our property there that, Megan will be happy to hear that, but that we'll probably see some reinvestment in some of those corridors that have been great at one point in our history and probably have an opportunity to reinvent themselves. I think the core, there is a lot of continued interest in making sure that we have a strong core if I had more bandwidth, I'd be buying up a lot of other properties around what we're doing. Certainly what Rockford and others are doing on the west side Bridge Street corridor is getting a lot of attention too, I think. And
yeah, and I could touch on Bridge Street, but also we see 2018 really like to see this opportunity for new inventory in the industrial sector, and so we have Walker View, which is 250-acre business park just off the Highway 96 and Walker exit. FedEx is operational now with a huge distribution center. Michigan State Police just announced new headquarters, $50+ million project, which I think really will kickstart that project. Talk about infrastructure, David. That had to happen in order to have pad-ready sites. So we're now really looking to attract these users. There is that balance between from a manufacturer, I need space absolutely right now, and so will speculative building occur in that sector? Probably, but again, we come back to these forces that are challenging is pricing, and so people have to make that decision to be able to pay those prices for that high quality product.
Well, if I could just tag on to Mike, I think Walker and that whole corridor, including Walker View, is for us, from the right places perspective and the kind of companies that we work with, a very important corridor. The infrastructure's up there. Fruitridge is hopefully going to get improved, et cetera. I'm glad to hear somebody's talking about building inventory, because when we get an inquiry and they wanted the building yesterday, as was talked about earlier, you got to build it, right? Because we don't really do much of spec buildings around here. And I think on the southeast side of the city or the county is what we call the Four Corners: Caledonia, Cascade, Kentwood, and Gaines Township. I think you're going to continue to see, with the advent of the pyramid being rebuilt and Switch putting up another 940,000 square feet on that property, you're going to continue to see, I think, the Four Corner area to develop. I also heard that some of the Four Corner communities are looking at potentially taking some of the commercial properties and turning it and asking for light industrial, which is for those of us who are dealing with those kind of companies, very important. And somebody even talked about putting a child care center in one of those centers. So, in other words, you're going to have to go to work. You need to provide certain amenities. Right. And obviously, the core of the city continues to be extremely critical, because even though if they may locate in Caledonia, we always bring them to the city first, because that's, part of our, but that's southeast and northwest. And on the northwest corridor, what's going to restrain some of it is we don't have enough public transportation. Okay? You have public transportation in 7 cities, but if I want to get somebody to Caledonia on a bus to go to work, there is no such thing. So whereas in Walker, we have worked with, the region and the community have worked with the mayor of Walker and others to actually get better service into that industrial area up there, okay? So that you get folks who need to go there, whether it's to urban seeding or FedEx or whatever, and have better bus service. So we need to look as a region also, not only at our parking issues downtown, but our transportation issues into the outlying corners of the county.
Interesting. Most of today has been very much a positive outlook. And I was talking to Dr. Paul Isley last night, and we were trying to come up with something that is a headwind instead of just a tailwind. So I'm wondering from you guys, rather than just continuing to always speak positively about 2018, what headwinds do you guys see as potential barriers to business in the coming year?
Well, one, the auto industry is plateauing. You can't keep up 18 million in sales. We've experienced that now for several years. But I think it'll plateau out at a decent level. Where you're going to see a big dip, unless oil prices change drastically, is in sedans. If you look at the auto industry, you will not see the industry lose money, but because they're selling trucks like crazy, SUVs like crazy. If you have oil prices at the level where you have them now, and gasoline prices at the level where they are now, people buy trucks, SUVs, and crossovers. They don't buy sedans. So General Motors has a huge inventory of sedans sitting around. So if you're a supplier in the auto industry on sedans, you're probably going to have an issue. So there's a soft spot there. And I'm so happy that Dr. Isley mentioned NAFTA. It's going under everybody's radar screen except a handful of us. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has done an analysis of if it drastically changes, if we bail on it altogether, which would be deadly. Michigan is the #1 affected state. Michigan is the #1 affected state if we really, really drastically change NAFTA. And those negotiations are ongoing, and it will impact auto, it will impact furniture, and it will impact ag. It is $5 billion out of this region and $24 billion out of the whole state of Michigan. And so we want to really be cognizant of that. That could actually throw off this entire conversation. So.
The big one we see is the one we've been talking about, which is finding a workforce. I think that we're probably all in some ways recognizing the flip side to the benefits of a low unemployment rate and trying to reinvent the way that we approach that.
You know, I would say to continue on some earlier conversations, still the thoughtful conversation around, and at least in the urban context, transportation in general, mobile, and that's why it's called Mobile GR now, not the Parking Commission. It needs to be really a thoughtful process with a lot of input, but we can't wait though either. There are some demands that need to be met now.
I'm going to address what I said earlier in the reverse fashion. I think e-commerce and the internet do pose a threat to brick and mortar retail, and there will be casualties. There certainly will be, big boxes that go out of business, malls that have to get, reconditioned, and I think the challenge is going to be to attract non-retail uses into those centers, whether they're medical, recreational, housing, and there's further challenges with that because then we need cooperation on a broad scale from the other retailers in those centers, the communities, the investors. So there is going to be an evolution, and managing that evolution is going to be critical.
Chris, from somebody that travels quite a bit around the country, from a macro level, what do you see around the country as some headwinds that we've...
I'll use a baseball analogy. I think we're in the 11th inning of a 9-inning game, and it's tied, and we may go down a run, but we may tie it up in the bottom of the 9th. I mean, I think even looking at Dr. Isley's reports, there's a difference between risk and uncertainty. You can calculate risk. I think there's so much uncertainty globally right now that geopolitically, with our debt ratios, with China, Japan, North Korea, I think that any one of those things could trigger that shallow effect. But I've been saying this for 2 years. I think that we've outstripped, or we were at a peak 18 months ago. And I'm looking at what we're doing in other parts of the country and even globally, and I'm saying, we're not growing top line. GDP is really, we're not innovating and coming up with the new minivan or the new internet. We haven't done that in a while, which is what drives growth. But we have leaned out companies to be so efficient that profits are still good. So I think there's this separation between Wall Street and Main Street that we're talking about, that companies will continue to fuel this, but the labor force is somewhat obsolescent in many areas, the unskilled laborers. I think that as that grows, that's where the bigger potential problem is. And I'm not sure, a lot of us are saying, 2018 looks good. What about 2019? Not so sure, but I think a lot of it's macro forces that I think could create a shift, whether it's shift in trade, shift in banking regulation, shift in the movement of capital across the globe. I'm a little bit befuddled about why we're still in this space, to be honest with you.
Okay, interesting. With record low vacancy rates, industrial were under 5%, retail were under 9%, office Downtown, we're about 10%. Where do deals get done? Maybe more of a question for you, Dave. Where do deals get done in 2018? Is it creativity with off-market transactions? Is it speculative construction?
I think 2017, you really had to be creative and you had to work a little harder to get things done, which is, we all adapt to the environments we're in. Every market has, issues that you have to deal with. Moving forward in 18, it's just we're going to have to be that much more creative to get, creative solutions in order to get things done. Things are still happening. I think, we have to be careful and kind of look around. I mean, I'd much rather be in a market we're in right now, where, it's positive. We're getting to a point where we're all kind of looking around saying, what's next? But looking back in the rearview mirror at what we went through during the downturn, I mean, that was a deep, downturn. So, looking forward, I think that, we just have to be creative and we just all have to work a little harder and be paying attention.
At this point, I think we'd like to open it up for some audience question and answer. We'll have 2 microphones. I can't see exactly where they are, but we'd love to get some questions for the audience, for our panel or for myself. Any questions? Just raise your hand. She's coming for you.
Oh, it's the mayor. So good.
Good morning. Thank you so much for this opportunity to hear. This is for Chris. You're from Denver. Something that I think that all Michiganders will be facing with is in 2018, next fall, most likely there's going to be an item on the ballot, and that is the legalization of recreation marijuana. Now, I've heard 2 reports, 2 presentations about Colorado and Denver, and both of them share the story of it's been a very negative effect on the economic conditions, especially on downtown Denver and the heads and beds market. Can you confirm, deny that, of the ill effect of the economic conditions due to the passage of this in Colorado, what was it, about a decade ago?
Well, I think it's been 3 or 4 years since we passed the bill. I haven't heard anything negative other than, it has generated more tax dollars that are fed back into schools. There's been a surplus of several $100 million that have been fed back. Oh, wow. If you look at crime or anything associated with that, the same people who were smoking marijuana before it was legal are smoking marijuana now. There's no growing of that part of the business. The second thing is, I believe, I don't know if this is true in all states, but I think that if you look at it as something that leads to other violent crimes, it hasn't been proven, and certain crimes are actually down as a relation to the sale of marijuana. More than that, I don't understand your comment about the downturn in downtown Denver. We've had rapid growth. We've had over 5 million square feet of new space come online, and every major company is moving there because of the talent pool. So I don't know if that's helping attract millennials or younger generations to move there. I would think maybe, just given the lifestyle.
Yeah, the comment came from the Denver's Chamber of Commerce to ours. The comments was, whatever you do, you need to defeat this because it's driven some of the dollars from downtown Denver because of the social changes that have taken place in Denver. And also part of the presentations were the decline and the conferences and conventions that were going to Denver are now going elsewhere because of the social conditions.
Could be. I live downtown and my neighborhood's booming. If you look at the inflation rate in the last 3 to 5 years and rental rates, they tell a story. And you look at vacancy rates, they've gone down. So I'm not sure I could correlate that.
I think we really need to look into it. We work so hard to develop a strong economic condition. We don't want anything that would turn us in the opposite direction. Thanks.
Yeah, I don't look at the states and see how they're doing economically and relative to that law and see how that's affected it, I guess.
Other questions from the audience?
West Michigan Conservative. Wow. We said everything.
Nothing? Any last comments from our panelists that they'd like to discuss or talk about? All set? Well, thank you all for joining us and participating, and thank you everybody for coming out for another great event.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you. Where are you
And
based?
thank you again to our sponsors and Fifth Third Bank and our partners, Grand Valley. So enjoy the rest of the day. Stay warm.